Money FM 89.3, the best of the afternoon update. Viewpoint.
Good afternoon to you. I'm Lynn Lee, your host on the Afternoon Update. Now, the big one. That's what U.S. President Donald Trump called his latest sweeping economic move on his social media platform ahead of his announcement of reciprocal tariffs. At a press conference, President Trump unveiled a roadmap for charging reciprocal tariffs on every country that charges duties on U.S. imports. The tariffs could be imposed as soon as April. So, what are reciprocal tariffs? Who might the U.S. president target? And more importantly, how will it impact countries in Asia, especially Singapore? For an expert view on this, we have Pushan Dutt, Professor of Economics and Political Science, joining us live this afternoon. Pushan, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get into Trump's reciprocal tariffs plan, just to frame the conversation a little bit, what is the global landscape of tariffs in the world from your perspective? And most would see tariffs as a protectionist tactic. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. So the way to think about tariffs is it does two things. One is that it's a tax on consumers, okay, like a sales tax on consumers, and it's also a subsidy to domestic producers, because as foreign goods become more expensive, then it actually boosts your domestic producers. But with all things Trump, I think we have to think very carefully about what kind of tariffs are they talking about, right? He said that there are three objective functions of tariffs. One is that it can be used as a source of revenue and replace income tax. This is a little bit crazy. This is nonsense. This is we can forget about this, okay, because the income tax base is much bigger. Imports are tiny compared to it. The second one we saw with Mexico, with Canada, etc., that it was a tool of coercion, right? Getting certain concessions out of them, right? The reciprocal tariff falls under the realm of tariffs, the regular tariffs, leveling the playing field and encouraging U.S. domestic industries, okay? And it's this part that he seems to be converging. Now, what is the problem with this? The problem with this is this goes against the WTO rules. So the way the WTO works is that if I charge a particular tariff to country X, I have to offer it to all WTO members. What Trump is saying is that I will set tariffs good by good, country by country, so it's going to be discriminatory. And non-discrimination is the guiding principle for WTO, which means it breaks the WTO rules and therefore breaks the global trading order. There's another rule of the WTO where you pledge not to raise your tariffs above a certain upper bound. Okay, these are called bound tariffs.
Okay.
If he raises it, then he will be violating WTO rules again. Okay, and WTO has been very successful in encouraging globalization and trade. So it's going to lead to a lot of disruption.
So in a way, it's illegal what he's doing now?
Well, it is illegal, but keep in mind that with, whether it's the Paris Climate Accord or WTO, no one really has jurisdiction. There is no international court. It's based on norms, right? Now, countries agreed to abide by these norms because, way back in the past, they had massive trade wars which hurt everybody. And then they got together after World War II and created the GATT, which eventually evolved into the WTO. And trade has been on the rise and it has benefited everyone since then.
All of Trump's moves on tariffs, we've been hearing a lot of them. What do you think is Trump's main goal here?
So I was just talking to some of my students and I was saying that, normally I would address all of this using an economics lens. But with Trump, I have to also use like a psychological lens, right? What are sort of his core beliefs? And one of his core beliefs always has been that he's called himself the tariff man. He believes tariffs are the magical bullet. So, one way is to say that, he thinks tariffs are a universal hammer and all of the world as a whole is a shiny brass nail. So therefore, tariffs are coming. We can't dodge these things. And the only thing is that what can countries and businesses do to sort of mitigate the damage, because there is going to be a lot of damage.
Speaking of which, how would this tit-for-tat tariff situation affect the price of goods and services in the U.S. and in other countries for that matter?
Okay, so there are lots of moving parts, so it's going to be a little bit complex. In the short run, it will raise prices in the U.S. So Trump did impose a bunch of tariffs when he was first in power, and almost something like 92% of the tariffs were passed on to the consumers in the U.S. So they experienced a rise in prices. This also tells me that you can think of, there are two kinds of tariffs that you have. One is on final goods, which are goods that consumers directly buy, like things like, they're importing clothing from China or toys from China. The second kind of tariffs are tariffs on intermediate goods, which go into the production of other goods. So think about steel and aluminum or machinery parts, etc. Now, what happens is that if he puts it on final goods, prices go up, consumers in the U.S. get annoyed, so therefore he's not going to do that. He's going to put it on intermediate goods. That's what he did last time as well, steel, aluminum, etc., because then people don't see directly the inflationary effect, the price shock, they see it indirectly, and it takes some time. So now the problem is that most of the world trade is actually in intermediate goods. So if I look at Singapore and U.S. trade, okay, about 80% of it is in intermediate goods. Okay, so these are the same things, getting into these production of final goods. So therefore, Singapore will be impacted. I don't think it will be impacted that much by reciprocal tariffs because Singapore tariffs are really, really low. They're close to zero. Singapore also runs a trade deficit with the U.S., so will not be in its crosshairs. The way Singapore will be impacted is that it's deeply embedded in the region through its corporate headquarters strategy. So Shein, for instance, has headquarters in Singapore. TikTok is headquartered in Singapore. Many of the supply chains are run out of Singapore. That's where a bunch of these disruptions will happen for Singapore.
Okay, I want to talk more about the impact on Singapore and as well as other Asian countries. But first, can you help us understand, you were saying the import tax on steel and aluminum entering the U.S., it's 25%. So why 25% versus 50% or 100%?
He seems to like the 25% number. There's a method to his madness. He loves the number 25. There was 25% tariffs on Mexico, on Canada, on Colombia, and now we see at 25%. The other number he likes a lot is 10%. Okay, so let's just hope that he anchors on 10% and not 25%. But right now, my hopes are fading.
Okay. And given that there are different duty rates, different tariffs, and we do live in a world with complexities and hundreds of thousands of products, how do you see this reciprocal tariff policy being implemented?
So one of the powers that the U.S. president has, they actually have a lot of leeway and degrees of freedom in foreign policy and in trade policy. Not so much in domestic policy, which means that, the rest of the world will be impacted a lot by trade policy and domestic policy. Now, how will it be implemented? Your guess is as good as mine. Most of this is being done through executive orders, but he has the ability to do this because he has flexibility and freedom under certain U.S. regulations where the Congress actually gave the responsibility to the president. But what is this going to lead to? It's going to lead to a massive scrambling and a way of, buying out Trump or appeasing Trump. So if I were China, I would do like a huge summit where, I do a signing ceremony on the Great Wall of China and convince Trump that he's the best negotiator in the world. We saw Modi doing this today, by the way. Okay, he was there. He was saying MEGA plus MAGA is equal to
I
mega.
heard that one. Yes,
okay,
yes.
Yeah, this is a clever turn of phrase, but India is in trouble because India is the one which has really high tariffs because historically it's very skeptical of participating in the global economy. Actually, for India, this might be a plus because it might force them to liberalize, which will be good for the Indian economy.
Okay, and then how do you see things playing out for Asian countries like Japan, South Korea, and China?
Okay, so again, if I look at it historically, what happened during the first Trump administration, the supply chains adjusted. A lot of the production, whether it was coming in from China or South Korea, Japan, they relocated to Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, right? Partly, especially the Chinese firms are trying to avoid the tariffs set by the U.S. The thing that I fear the most are something which are called component tariffs. Component tariff will say, okay, this amount of value added is actually coming from China, even though if it is manufactured in Vietnam. So I'm going to tariff that. What is the problem with this? It massively increases the administrative burden of firms in this region. Okay, it makes it very difficult for them to calculate these things. It increases their transaction costs. The second thing that's been happening in all these countries is these countries are export powerhouses, and they're going to now look for alternate markets. this will trigger off price wars. So China is the big player here. Mm-hmm. China is trying to export a lot into Latin America. And by slashing prices, this creates deindustrialization in countries like Brazil and Argentina. They are not going to accept that. So they are going to actually raise tariffs against Chinese exports. They've already done that. So as a result, we are going to get like rounds of these tariff retaliation, re-retaliation, and trade wars, and that's going to make it very difficult. All these countries, what they have to do is either have a very good domestic strategy, which is insulated from trade wars, or a very tight regional strategy like ASEAN in order to get around these trade wars.
Interesting, isn't it? Because reciprocal tariffs mean that if country A charges, like you say, 25% on an item coming into its country from the U.S. will reciprocate with the same duty rate on goods from country A coming into the U.S., correct? So what happens if the U.S. happens to have a higher duty for a country? Will Trump lower the U.S. duty rate? And that would be reciprocal, wouldn't it?
I think it's best if we don't discuss this so as to not give Trump more ideas. But
Okay.
If you ask the question, it is true. If you look at agriculture products, because they are farmers are a powerful lobby, they have very high levels of protection on sugar, on cotton, and all these kinds of things. So is he going to actually now reduce those tariffs? Because, for instance, Jamaica is a big sugar producer. Brazil is a big sugar producer. It has close to 0% tariff. I doubt if they're going to do that because it's going to be still determined by U.S. domestic interest groups. So you're going to not get this kind of symmetry where some tariffs actually come down and more market access is granted to Brazilian sugar exporters. I think it's going to be one way where market access is shut off.
Okay, before I let you go, Pushan, maybe a lighter question. Today being Valentine's Day, if and when the reciprocal tariffs come into effect, how would these tariffs affect the prices of roses and chocolates next year?
So I think in agricultural trade, I have to check these numbers, but I think there's protection for coffee, cocoa in the U.S. So if Trump is symmetric, then he will bring this down and chocolate prices will come down. If there is disruption in supply chains, then, roses prices will actually start going up. But thankfully, these are not a big part of our budget except one day a year.
Okay, fantastic insights there, Pushan. Thank you so much. Pushan Dutt, Professor of Economics and Political Science from INSEAD.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.